The New Order is a Hearts of Iron 4 mod that takes place in a dark, alternate history timeline, where the Axis powers utterly won World War II. America stands as the last bastion of hope against the fascist menace in Europe and Asia. But I will not be talking too much about the rest of the world in today's video because the New Order 2 has finally been announced and showcased officially. Now, if you've been in the modding community for a while, you know how long awaited this has been. I honestly thought that the day would never come. I love the New Order, but the dev team hasn't really done that much except remove content and then add skeleton content to other countries. But we finally have new information and focus trees for what American content is going to look like in the New Order 2. And in this video, I really just wanted to cover the new history and lore, what we know about. Before we dive into the more deep, specific lore details that are changing, I wanted to talk a bit more about the sweeping changes coming to America. I think the biggest change to American content is no more NPP. Now, America is still divided between Democrats and Republicans. So if you're unfamiliar with the New Order or the old lore, the NPP, or National Progressive Pact, was a coalition between multiple smaller parties like the Communist Party, the Progressive Party, the Nationalist Party, and many more. It was a big tent party made up of many different ideologies, all united in their opposition to the current political establishment of Democrats and Republicans. They will now be gone. Now, I always found them to be just supremely unrealistic. Now, I'm not one of those people that says that alternate history has to be realistic or that the New Order needs to be super realistic. Since, the whole history timeline that they set up is just super unrealistic, on its face. At least in regards to Germany dominating the war and Japan winning in the East. But it never made sense to me that people would clamor to join and support a new political party that has such a big tent that ardent blood and soil nationalist types would share a party with communists. Now, big tent parties obviously exist and can find a lot of political success. In fact, both the Democrat and Republican parties are big tent parties in America. It's basically a political necessity due to how the Electoral College works. But some parties' tents are just too big to ever work. A party could not function if multiple factions in the party are diametrically opposed to each other on most issues and would only agree on rather superfluous stuff. Like, let's look at the Democrats. They obviously have some more, we'll call them conservative Democrats, and then there's more progressive socialist types. Now, they might disagree on a lot, but they would also agree on a lot and look at a lot of issues the same way. They would still be able to most likely, support a presidential candidate together, support a Senate candidate together. You would never get a Republican to support a Democratic candidate. They're just too opposed. Now, independent voters are another thing. But again, some parties are just too big tinted to ever exist. So I'm glad that the NPP will be going away in TNO2. The other big announcement is the number of new presidential candidates that you'll be able to play and run as. As of right now, they have said that there will be 30 potential presidential candidates. Now, we already know who a couple of them are. For the Republican side, we only know of Richard Nixon, who is the sitting president when he first started playing, and the GOAT, Barry Goldwater, who's honestly one of my favorite failed presidential candidates. Actually, when I vacationed in Arizona, I actually got to stop by his memorial, and it was pretty underwhelming. In fact, it was pretty hard to walk to as well. It's like out there in the middle of nowhere. There's like a park next to it, but you can't even park at the memorial. But whatever, that means nothing to anybody. The potential Democratic candidates that we know of so far are Hubert Humphreys, who is a leading advocate for civil rights and a leader of the Liberal Democrats. Another potential Democratic candidate is Robert Kennedy, who is campaigning on his brother's charm and deep connections. He's a bit of an enigma politically. He's charismatic and knows when to shut up. He's in favor of civil rights, but he keeps it low-key enough to not upset Southern Democrats too much. And the final presidential candidate that we know about is George Wallace, who in real life ran for president. He campaigned strongly on states' rights and a pro-segregation platform. So currently the working theory in the community is that for either side, depending on who's president and then who's campaigning for president, there are going to be 3 potential candidates to choose for on who you want to run for either party, which I think would be really cool. The devs mentioned that they want all the presidents to be much more reactive to each other. Previously in the New Order, it was very easy to just completely undo everything the previous president had done. You would go down a pretty simple focus tree and just completely undo 4 years of hard work. Now, in real life, a president can do a lot to undo the work a previous president did, but that's really only true in regards to executive orders, that they can just get rid of all of that within the first couple of days in their new term in office. You know, any bill they pass would need to be repealed in Congress. You know, I'm sure that Trump and Republicans now didn't enjoy Biden's Build Back Better bill. Even with Trump in office, there's nothing that he can really do with with a pin stroke and just get rid of it all. So I'm glad that they're focusing more on the actual implications of a president making changes and then future presidents just having to sort of deal and live with that fallout. Another new feature is the budgeting process. So with the new budgeting system that they're making, you're going to have so many points that you can put into the budget, and underfunding or overfunding departments will lead to consequences. If you underfund it, you're going to have to deal with those departments just being less efficient, and then if you overfund it, you're going to run into the problem of having diminishing returns, as the more money you throw at a problem does not always make a department more efficient. So I'm glad that they're adjusting the budgeting process, because currently in TNO, you can basically slash the budget with almost 0 consequences. So they do have a system where it's set up where you do have to put a minimum amount of your budget towards certain services. So like the military or social services has to make up a certain percentage of your GDP. But you could just put every budget to the minimum and just enjoy your GDP going up with no drawbacks. Nobody would get upset with you, the people wouldn't riot. That's really all you had to do, and economic stability was ensured. So I'm glad that they're changing up the budgeting process to make it more interactive. So that's all the major changes. Now I just want to talk about the new lore. And to do that, I'm going to have to go all the way back into the 1930s for FDR's second term. They start in July 1937. Senator Joseph T. Robinson, FDR's bulldog on his court packing plan, drops dead in the Washington heat. The president should be mourning a friend. Instead, he's staring out the carriage window, watching his New Deal coalition crack like old plaster. Midterms arrive, Republicans surge, and Roosevelt, spooked by memories of Woodrow Wilson's post-war collapse, decides not to run for that unprecedented third term. So that means, in this new timeline, Social Security and the New Deal never pass. If you're unfamiliar with what I mentioned as the court packing plan, when FDR first initially wanted his New Deal to go through, the Supreme Court was very hesitant and were saying that they would strike it down as unconstitutional. Now, FDR's real-world plan, which worked by the way, was essentially telling them that he would just pack the court and open up a bunch of new seats and appoint people, and that they would just rubber stamp whatever he wanted. So if the Supreme Court wanted to avoid that, they would let the New Deal go through, which they did. In this timeline, due to Joseph T. Robinson's death, that plan is never able to proceed. So into the vacuum steps Thomas E. Dewey, the 38-year-old Manhattan defense attorney who built his reputation by frog-marching mobsters out of smoky back rooms. Dewey is able to charm both Wall Street moderates and Main Street conservatives, promising reasonable government and a return to laissez-faire sanity. He squeaks past the sickly Democrat Harry Hopkins and inherits a world already on fire. Isolationist by instinct, Dewey blinks, and the Japanese completely flatten Pearl Harbor. Britain, left undersupplied due to no Lend-Lease, buckles under a German invasion in 1943. The Soviets have to fend for themselves because Senator Robert Taft refuses to send, quote, one dime to Stalin, which, hey, fair enough. Chemical weapons scourge southern England, and MacArthur's Grand Pacific First campaign bleeds men on the coral of Papua. The Manhattan Project starves for funds and talent. Anyone with left-leaning college essay gets purged as a security risk, and the first usable bomb slides from 1945 to 1946. which is unfortunately too late to matter. In June 1945, America signs an armistice in neutral Sweden. Europe is partitioned under the Nazi regime. Asia is conceded and fascism is undefeated. Overnight, the arsenal of democracy, America, became the nation that quit. Dewey's approval falls through the floorboard, and the word defeats enters the Americans' political vocabulary for the first time. Trying to salvage some lost national pride, Dewey ships a small force to Siberia to prop up the rump Soviet state. An occupation that is so half-hearted, the press dubs it the never-ending withdrawal. Voters respond by handing Democrats the largest congressional supermajority in U.S. history, which is really saying something because after the American Civil War, Republicans were in power for quite a long time. Cue Dwight D. Eisenhower, drafted by both Southern Dixiecrats and Northern liberals. The general of broad grin and empty platforms wins 1948 in a cakewalk. America crowns him something of the next George Washington, a military man selected to become president. Ike then spends the next 8 years doing as little as possible. He repurchases TVA dams, he oversees the birth of the interstate system, and increases troop deployments to the frozen Siberian shitfest. Because that at least feels like movement. But on civil rights he stalls, hoping time itself is going to solve lynchings and poll tax problems. When Hawaiian sugar workers strike against the Big Five Corporation, Ike watches management break them with FBI-backed raids and company unions. Even liberals on his own party start muttering that the man on the mountaintop never came down. Meanwhile, nuclear optimism blooms like a desert flower. Vegas tourists drive out at dawn to watch mushroom clouds blossom over Nevada. If only these bombs had existed in 1943, commenters say, we could have saved Britain. Behind the spectacle, two intelligence agencies claw at each other. The FBI and Special Intelligence Service in the Americas, and the newborn CIA everywhere else. Coups, assassinations, and gunboat diplomacy become standard operating procedure. Ike's indifference paves the road for Estes Kefauver, the Tennessee trustbuster with the preacher's drawl and his golden boy running mate John F. Kennedy. Hopefully you know who that is. Southerners trust Kefauver, and Northern liberals trust Kennedy's pedigree, and he has Eleanor Roosevelt's blessing. The honeymoon between the two lasts around 15 minutes. Kefauver refuses to enforce the Supreme Court's desegregation rulings, and he tries to cut a grand bargain with Japan. Mutual trade, fixed gold exchange, recognition of Tokyo puppets, organized labor screams, and conservatives howl, and the Senate kills the treaty on live television. Gus Hall, head of the Communist Party, walks free, courtesy of Kefauver's pardon, in the name of civil liberties, and half the country reaches for a gun. Civil rights pressure builds like July humidity. Senator Eleanor Roosevelt, Hubert Humphrey, and MLK push an omnibus bill that can't pass yet refuses to die. By 1960s, the Democrats are split between segregationist electors backing Ross Barnett and liberals who would happily dynamite Jim Crow. The Electoral College is in deadlock. Under the 12th Amendment, the race slithers into Congress, where deal-making and exhaustion produce the strangest ticket in American history. President Richard Milhouse Nixon and Vice President John Fitzgerald Kennedy. Something like this has happened since our third president was decided by Congress, Thomas Jefferson. Nixon begins 1961 as one of the most disliked winners in U.S. politics. He lacks a popular mandate, a congressional majority, or even a cabinet he fully controls. A man famous for punching left tries compromise, and it tastes awful. But Tricky Dick does find an opening. The Supreme Court's liberal Goliath, Chief Justice William O. Douglas. When a Nazi contestant on a game show sues over revoked prize money, yes, you heard that right, Nixon orchestrates a backstage smear campaign. Allegations of Douglas's negligence and extravagant speaking fees flood the airwaves. With Dixiecrats' votes whipped by Lyndon Johnson, Douglas becomes the first Chief Justice ever impeached. In a stunning and cynical victory that lifts GOP morale heading into the 1962 midterms. Yet Nixon troubles breed faster than his triumphs. Eleanor Roosevelt dies, her funeral becoming a civil rights rally on live TV. Kennedy, sensing legacy, co-authors a new civil rights bill with Humphrey. If Nixon vetoes, he looks like he's pro-lynching. If he signs, he loses the whole South that he tried all of 1960 trying to court. He chooses subterfuge instead, trying to steal credit early and then water down the bill in committee. Crises swirl, the Malagasy uprising against Vichy France offers a foreign policy distraction. The CIA wants to arm liberal rebels. The SIS warns Congress will roast whoever hands bullets to Japanese puppets. Nixon's covert adventures risk the very scandals he once directed at Douglas. Then fate turns its gaze on JFK. Doctors leak whispers of Kennedy's Addison's disease, which he did have in real life. It's a rather debilitating disease that causes chronic fatigue and back pain. And JFK was not helped by the fact that medicine back then isn't quite as good as we have it now, and he used steroids most of his life to treat it. Nixon is also not clean. Tabloids like to talk of tapes that could sink Nixon if Bobby ever decides to go nuclear. Under pressure and with Hoover's FBI nudging, Kennedy decides to resign as vice president. The White House scrambles for a new VP while Democrats fracture. Stevenson ages out, and Lyndon B. Johnson heart stutters again. And upstart candidates Humphrey, Bobby Kennedy, and George Wallace sharpen their knives for 1964. At 1964, when the game will start, America is in a crossroads. If Nixon is able to weather the storm, he strides into Dallas and selects Representative Gerald Ford as his VP for Term 2. If the dice fall the other way and certain things get leaks, this same impeachment machinery that Nixon used can be used against him. Senator Barry Goldwater will seize the GOP banner and pairs with Maine's Margaret Chase Smith as a last stand campaign. Across the aisle, Democrats start to duke it out. Humphrey sells Roosevelt's nostalgia and liberal idealism, Robert Kennedy offers dynastic hope in a bulging war chest, and Wallace hawks states' right populism, betting that the North is sick of race riots. Whoever staggers out of that primary steps onto a world stage set aflame. Everything that happens next to America, whether there's detente or Armageddon, a technocratic renaissance or constitutional collapse, all depends on your choices. That is only the start of the new American content that we know about. I am beyond excited that we're finally getting some confirmation and news on TNO2. That's really all the lore that we know of so far, or at least that the team has released. I'm not really in their Discord or anything, so there might be some other stuff that we don't know about. But that's really all I got. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe. Other than that, please remember that Jesus loves you.